Thursday, July 14th, 2022 Town of Monroe Planning Board Workshop and regular meeting. Noreen, would you please take the roll call?
Bonnie Franson.
Present.
Jeff Manson.
Here.
Pat Shea.
Here.
Nick Napoli.
Here.
Steve Thau.
Here.
In terms of the fire exits, if I was there, I would point to the main entrance that you came in. Behind me to the right would be the other exit out onto the terrace, and then to the rear of the building you can also exit that way. So would everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Real quick note, Noreen had suggested I mention this. The planning board is looking for a member. And
Hold on, Bonnie. They
Bonnie, hold
can't
on 1
hear
second.
you.
You try that.
Ready?
Is that better?
I can hear you fine. I don't know.
At this point, she's just making an announcement that the town board has put out a flyer that the planning board and the zoning board are all looking for members if anybody is interested. It's on constant contact, and you just have to reach out to the supervisor's secretary with a resume and a letter of interest.
Thank you, Noreen.
You're welcome. It's a little hard to hear you.
Okay, let me see if I can, something will help here. So the first item on the agenda is DG management. So when the applicant is at the table, please introduce yourselves and provide us a status of where we are in the process. In addition, we have Dave Tompkins, who is with us from CHA, who's been reviewing the proposed plans to enhance the habitat, and we'll discuss that and continue this, the public hearing, to an August meeting. Just for clarification, at 6:45, I have to leave for another meeting. I will return, but at that point in time, I will turn over control of the meeting to Jeff Manson, who will serve as chairperson. All right, DG.
My name is Jim Bates. I'm with Ecological Analysis. We're the environmental consultants. The applicant's here, and Jay Morrow, the attorney, is on Zoom. Jay, are you going to be handling the first introduction?
Sure, turn that microphone. Put it down.
We're using Ashley's to help because I think it's a little bit better. George?
Oh, okay, fine.
Hey, do you want to just give it of where you are, an introduction?
Yeah, basically, since the last time I think we were in front of the board, you've received a hereby.
Hold on 1 second, Jay.
Recording in progress.
Is the bar up there?
What bar?
No, the bar is.
I was going to tell Sean to go move his desk, but okay, I was just trying to think of something else.
Try again, Jay.
You want me to continue?
All the way up. We could.
All right, Jay, can you try again?
I'm on mute.
Tell me when you want me to continue.
Can you hear him better now?
Now it's good.
Okay. You want me to go on?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So you received the plan that was drawn up by Mr. Esposito. I believe it contains certain intended improvements and existing conditions that would establish the easement area, Orange and Rockland easement area, as a habitat area. I believe this was reviewed by both Mr. Bates. I believe Mr. Tompkins also reviewed it. You've received correspondence from Mr. Tompkins and from Mr. Bates, as well as a letter from Orange and Rockland indicating that they basically had no problem with what was intended by the plan. I'll be honest with you, I'm not the person to discuss the technical issues here regarding what's on the plan and what's in the letter. So I think at this point I could turn it over to those who know better than I do.
Okay, this is Jim Bates again with Ecological Analysis. We've been to the site a few different times. We've looked over it for specialized habitat, as the code kind of calls for.
Who's going to say something?
Is Jim Bates going to speak to these matters?
He is.
Yeah. Jim, go ahead.
I thought I was doing that.
He is. Can you not hear him? Bonnie, can you not hear him?
I cannot. Jay, can you hear him, or Dave, can you hear him?
No.
We cannot hear him.
Can you hear me now?
One of us has to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'll restart again. Once again, it's Jim Bates with Ecological Analysis. As requested by Ms. Franzen, we were out on the site on two different occasions. We walked the site for specialized habitat, trying to refer back to the code as to what is specialized habitat for a protected species. We went through, and the protected species for this area are Indiana bats, and then the Fish and Wildlife Service is now also is looking to include monarch butterflies. We went through, and since there's no major trees, because it was clear cut a few years ago, we then kind of wrote off Indiana bats, but it's also a north-facing slope, so that's not really good Indiana bat habitat, as maternity trees need to be on a south-facing slope for heat. So we went through and looked at the open power line for pollinators and other things that the butterflies would use. There are some of those species there which are shown in the pictures in my report. Then we worked with Mr. Esposito to develop enhancing the habitat for that, similarly to what was done for cardinal blue butterflies, in places upstate and those areas, because monarch butterflies are pretty mobile, and what's happening is the food sources that they eat on is dwindling. So places like this can be overplanted to create a situation that is beneficial to them. We went through Mr. Tompkins' letter. We concur with most points. The ones that I disagree with is, since I'm trying to create an insect habitat, I don't want to bring birds in to feast on them. There's that point. We concur that there should be a monitoring and repairing term for about 3 years. So I think that kind of summarizes where we are at this point in time.
Thank you, Jim. Dave, do you want to add anything with regard to your review?
Sure. I have a couple of comments. Again, this is Dave Tompkins. One of the questions I had is, the landscape plan definitely has some merit, and I thought it was well done. I would like to see a written text of the methods and the procedures to be used. And it should spell out certain things like what preparation of seed bed, of anything, when time of year you're going to do the planting, fall or spring. There's a process called stratification of seed that's used for milkweed. You know, the locations, how are you going to mark the locations so that you can do successive monitoring, in the 3-year period. Things like that, more of a written monitoring program. I would also like to see more of a baseline survey. I know you've been out to the site on 2 occasions, but I don't think those 2 occasions are sufficient to quantify the vegetation that's out there and to determine the level of utilization by any butterflies that are out there. And I think those 2 points are necessary to kind of determine if the enhancement is successful at the end of the monitoring period. Otherwise, you'll have data at the end of the monitoring period and you won't know whether it worked, basically. I disagree with the bird boxes. I think that the bird boxes are a very easy benefit, and that's part of the natural food cycle, birds eating insects. And just because you have the birds there doesn't mean they're going to be predating the butterflies. They kind of work that out over the millennium. And again, those are my general comments. It's just more detail of how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, how you're going to monitor it. And again, I think more of a baseline to document what's there now.
Thank you, Dave. Ashley, should we start with the planning board's reactions to the material that's been submitted?
Sure.
Okay, the other thing, Ashley, because I believe we're continuing the public hearing, do we need to make a motion to that effect?
Yes, I was going to suggest you did that before we forgot there. So you had previously adjourned the public hearing to July 19th, but that meeting is being canceled. So if you can reschedule that adjourned hearing date until August 16th at 6 p.m.?
Was it the 16th or the 17th?
16th.
16th.
Okay, so let's take care of that first in terms of housekeeping. I'd like to adjourn the public hearing to the August 16th planning board meeting at 6 p.m. May I have a second?
I'll make that motion. I'll make that second, sorry.
If someone seconds, let me know, Ashley.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Jeff seconded.
Okay, Noreen, would you pull the board?
Bonnie Franson,
Aye.
Jeff Manson,
Aye.
Pat Shea. Nick Napoli.
Aye.
Thank you. Because I have limited time here, I'm just going to kind of kick this off. One of the concerns I've had with regard to this evaluation we've been doing for habitat is that the cluster subdivision standards, if you look at where it talks about application of the provisions to important physical, cultural, and natural features, is that it states known habitats containing endangered, threatened, or special concern wildlife species, protected native plants, endangered, threatened, or rare plants, or state-identified significant habitats. And I don't know that as part of all of this, as much as I support the whole concept of improving the landscape and the conservation easement, or the conceptual conservation easement area, I don't know that we've actually discovered species that meet that that provision. I know later on under procedure with conservation value and analysis, there's reference to habitat for sensitive species, but from my perspective, that's just shorthand for what was actually noted under again, the particular section that I read earlier in the zoning. Having said that, I think that there's still time between now and when we take up the public hearing again to continue to evaluate and look to see whether butterfly species and the monarch butterfly in particular are inhabiting the site. And I myself am willing and committed to go out and visit the site since it's nearby to see what I may be able to observe, and I'll go out there numerous times. But again, I'm a little concerned with regard to the intent of the cluster development regulations and whether or not, in fact, this is going to satisfy it versus doing a conventional plan. Because I think it's very important what we're identifying as lands that have value from a conservation perspective, and again, meeting our cluster regulations. The other concern I have is that in looking at the letter that came back from Orange and Rockland, on the one hand, they do not object to the tree plan, which is positive. However, they then at the very end of their letter conclude that please note that ONR will retain right to access, inspect, manage, and maintain the electrical transmission right away for periodic vegetation management. And it specifically says this includes all techniques and methods such as mechanical pruning, mowing, removal, and herbicidal treatments in accordance with the ONR transmission vegetation management plan. So my concern is long-term in that all of this work will be done to support a quality habitat, and Orange and Rockland is retaining its right to basically use herbicides, cut vegetation, and do things that are required to maintain their lines. I also think that ultimately, if we do decide to go this route, if we do find an important species or a regulated species, I'd really like the applicant to give thought to how is this maintained for that purpose in the long term. It's not just a matter of putting up some bushes and planting some trees. I think as Dave alluded to, there's certain maintenance and certain techniques that have to be followed for a period of time for this area to continue to be valuable for a species that might utilize the site. So I think that's something that needs to be considered. Again, from my perspective, I'm supportive of the whole concept, but I think that there are some hurdles. I don't think we've actually found that the habitat, in fact, does support a particular regulated species or a rare species. I'm concerned about Orange and Rockland reserving the right to use techniques that would, in fact, impact that area for its very purpose. And that's where I stand at this point. So I'll let the other planning board members speak on this topic.
So I was an early proponent of the use of the easement as well as the other lands that we were talking about being under conservation for habitat preservation. I think it's an important piece of land for that. I've spoken about that in numerous meetings. I have the same concern with the verbiage in the O&R letter when I read it today. One of the very first projects that Bonnie and I first were on when we joined the board dealt with conservation easement, and the techniques that O&R is talking about needing to use seem to go against what I understand appropriate for a conservation easement area. And so I guess the question is, how do we balance that out? I would say that as a resident of Rico Terrace, I have witnessed a small presence of monarch butterfly in the area of the DG management property. I've seen it myself. So, I mean, I don't know if I can say I can attest to that, but I am witness to that. And I think that with plantings and other techniques, that could be further supported. And I think if we take care of one species, frankly, we're taking care of all the species that use that land so effectively as a means of transportation between the water at O&R Lakes and the woods back behind the properties on the far side of Scunnamunk. So,
Can I say something?
please.
One of the things that O&R regularly does is one of their things called mowing. And one of our management practices would be to brush hog some of those areas on a fall basis, because, things like milkweed, they're herbaceous plants. I don't want trees coming up through them. I don't want brush shading them out. It doesn't benefit them. So Orange and Rockland only wants to protect their high lines. So if the area is periodically brush hogged as part of the maintenance and monitoring plan, there's no need for them to come in and nuke it. There just really isn't.
So you're saying some of those things would actually support, the things that would support the habitat
Yes,
would also support O&R's need as well?
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I could interject for one moment, this is Dave Tompkins. I will support what Jim says. If we could get Orange and Rockland to restrict use of herbicides in this area, that would be excellent. But I totally support what Jim is saying in that occasional mowing actually turns back succession and is beneficial to the concept here of having an early successional habitat. So it's what Orange and Rockland would do isn't all bad, but we definitely want to limit the use of herbicides.
But I'm grateful to hear that you saw the butterflies out there. Like I said, I've only been out there a few times, and the milkweed wasn't in bloom, and so I didn't see them. So you've actually seen them there. That's helpful, isn't it, Bonnie?
Does anybody else want to speak from the planning board?
Can you hear me now? Okay. So we've been working on this project for, 2 years plus, right? And for such a kind of significant event, I wonder how it wound up on this far down the line after so much money's been spent. Just from a protocol point of view, isn't this something that should be looked at first before everybody spends so much money and time?
Is Bonnie okay if
Ashley, you can speak to that.
So the applicant had gone to the ZBA for a variance from this amount of conservation space that had to be on the property, but that was denied, so then they did return and now are trying to establish that there's conservation.
I see, so it was really first on the agenda, but you went for a variance.
It went for a variance when it was still.
Right.
What's been for both.
Okay.
Can I just clarify that the application to the ZBA on the variance did not include consideration of this particular issue? We had submitted, Mr. Bates, we had submitted a previous letter asking this board to reconsider the conservation value argument on the property. The board said, no, you take it up with the ZBA. We went to the ZBA. The ZBA said, listen, we're not going to consider that. It's not within our purview. And they denied the variance under grounds strictly relating to the granting of area variances and did not consider this issue. And therefore it was preserved to come back to you despite the action the ZBA took.
So Bonnie, I do just want to note the time. It's about 6:30, and I know there's another application that was supposed to be before while you were.
Right. Do any of the planning board members have anything else they want to add?
No comment from me.
Hold on a second, Jay.
No.
No? Okay, Jay?
I'll speak briefly, just real quick to the Orange and Rockland letter. I know Mr. Brum, I'm sure penned this entire letter, but I can tell you that the need for the last paragraph probably came from an attorney. The attorney was not going to it was not going to allow something in writing to come through that could be construed as a waiver of any rights under a written easement document. So this was really more of, I'm telling you, even though, you know, you can read into it what you want, but basically it's a reservation of their rights under their easement. It's not necessarily what they're going to do. And the other thing I would point out here is that we have the benefit of some history with this parcel in the easement area. It's been years and years since that transmission line's been up, and we have a fairly good idea as to what O&R probably is going to do over time and what they're not going to do over time. And I think that should give some comfort as to what activities you can expect to see there, even though they have this rather wide reservation of rights at the bottom. So I would just ask the board to consider that.
Real quick, Jim or Dave, what is the status of the Monarch Butterfly at this point in time in New York State or federally?
It's a candidate species with the federal government. It's a candidate species with the federal government, which means it's nothing in New York State until the federal government says what they want to do.
Okay, so the federal government is contemplating potentially listing it.
Yes, they're working on it now.
Okay, thank you. With that, I think we're going to continue to pursue this, do some, again, get out to the field when we can. I think we're getting closer to the milkweed being there and monarchs potentially being present. I would love to observe one there, especially because there's others that I believe look like a monarch butterfly. So it would just be really beneficial to, in fact, observe them on the site. So we're going to continue this public hearing to August 16th. We have plenty of time to be able to get out into the site, see if we, witness the monarch or some other species that might be present. That would meet the intent of the cluster development provisions. So we're going to continue this, and thank you for your time and being here. We are going to move on to the next agenda item, again, only because I have to leave, and we want to consider that before I have to leave attendance here. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. So the next item on the agenda is VJ site plan, Aaron Business Park, Larkin Drive, Monroe.
Bonnie, I'm once again going to recuse myself from this application.
Thank you, Jeff.
Evening, Madam Chairman. This is George Lithgow from Jacobitz and Gubitz for the applicant. With me are Ken Worsted, CME, and Pat Smith from RD. We would like to consider the possibility that we could make things go a little bit faster tonight by moving forward with the preparation in concert with your consultants, moving forward on preparation of a resolution for your August meeting that will address seeker, site plan approval, the waiver, and all the other nuts and bolts that will be necessary in order for you to consider action on this. Obviously, it will be up to you whether to approve, deny, or require conditions, but we'd like to put that in a format so it's ready for you and the board to consider in August. We think we can do that in concert with your consultants, and we would like your permission to do that and your direction to the consultants to work with us on that.
So real quick, I just want to acknowledge that Sean did provide a memo for DG management for everybody's consideration. So I'm sure the applicant will review it and will review it as well, but I didn't want to not mention that. So with regard to BJ's, I believe we had a response from the county, and they had raised a question, and I don't recall if this was, I don't think it was addressed, One of the comments that does relate to seeker, and I'm not sure if you addressed it, George, is groundwater protection. And so I think whatever seeker determination we make, we need to take that into consideration.
Certainly will.
They also had some comments with regard to environmental constraints and the northern long-eared bat. So I think we need to address it. I don't think that there's habitat present or trees present that would necessarily be supportive of that species on the site, but we would need to take that into consideration as well.
We have added a note to the plan which will provide for the tree clearing during the bat protection period.
Okay. So I'm actually going to right now, I'd like to turn it over to Ashley just to talk about where we are in the process. We did get your materials, George, but there really wasn't sufficient time to turn it around. So I'd like Ashley to speak to seeker, and then if the applicant after that could just quickly discuss whether or not there have been any substantive changes to the layout before I head out, that would be appreciated.
So as far as seeker, you did, I believe last month, start reviewing the part 2 and discuss some items that you wanted more information on from the applicant. They did make a submission of, I think, proposed, have not had an opportunity to review that, so it's something I could certainly look at, and if it addresses all of those points, then it would be in order likely for a neg deck, depending on the substance of that.
What do you want from the applicant in terms of readiness? We have not made substantive changes to the site plan itself. We have received the town engineer's memo. It notes a couple of issues that should be addressed regarding the O&R easement, which we've discussed with the project engineer, and he can address with the town engineer, and we don't think that's going to be a problem. There are traffic comments which we received yesterday. There is a landscaping memo which we received today. All of those, I think, for the most part, have technical issues, or in the case of landscaping species, they want something bigger, something smaller, something different. But all of those, I think we can accommodate, with one exception for the landscaping related to the suggestion that there be a buffer around the detention basin. That is not currently shown on the landscaping plan, and we have some concern that we could actually do it and comply with O&R's requirements. So that is one thing that we will address with O&R and with your landscaping consultant, and see if we can work out a reasonable solution for that. The only other issues I think that exist in terms of points that require planning board input are 4 or 5 issues that were identified in the AKRF memo. For example, whether or not the sidewalk should be provided, whether or not there should be striping within the fueling area. Ken Worstead is here. He can speak more to the detail of those suggestions. We could either attempt to resolve them now, but I have one eye on the clock and our time draws nigh. So what we could do is work with the board and its consultants to frame those out in a way that we think is that addresses the issue. For example, we have put the sidewalk on the plan, and it will be provided if the board wants it. We have an issue with the striping because BJ's has 200 some odd gas stations. They don't employ striping within the stacking area, and there's some question as to whether it should be provided. And we could certainly work out some condition, which if it should prove necessary, because there's some aberration in the way the Monroe site works, that we could provide it if the building inspector determines it's necessary. So we have, I think, solutions for all the open issues that we can frame out for you for discussion at the August meeting, and it will be provided to you before the meeting, so you have ample time to review it.
Thank you, George. Real quick, Ashley, I think one of the things we wanted to discuss was whether or not we thought a public hearing was necessary.
Yes.
Okay, so from my perspective, given the site's location, essentially surrounded by other commercial uses, I'm really not inclined. I don't necessarily feel the need to have a public hearing for this particular application, but I'd like to hear from the other board members. Public hearings are not required as part of site plans; they're optional. And so it's really up to the board. If you all think that there'd actually be a benefit to having a public hearing, we will hold one. But at this point in time, I'm not, from my own perspective, I'm not seeing that it's necessary. But please, board members, let us know what your thoughts are.
This is Pat. I haven't really heard anyone talk. Of course, I'm not on Facebook and not following everything that's going on with respect to the planning board, but I haven't seen or heard anyone really comment in a positive or negative way about the BJ's facility, other than myself, because I'd like to have lower gas prices, you know. But
Yeah, hey, Pat.
Just to note, it was 3:21 in Mahwah, New Jersey.
You're kidding. Wow.
Oh, sorry, 4:21. 4:21.
I'd leave right
It's an hour difference.
There's some people leaving the building.
4:21.
You gotta clear a room, buddy.
I'm not really adding much here. Hey, Bonnie, it's Nick. Just piggybacking off of what Pat said. I've been on all these other sites too, and no one really has a comment. And I'm with him. I want lower gas prices, so bring it on.
Okay.
Bonnie, this is Steve. I agree also. There's no impact whatsoever on any residential locations anywhere near that the BJ site. So I'm inclined to say as well that it doesn't necessitate a public hearing.
Thank you. Anybody else?
That's
everybody? Okay, I can't see. All right, with that, then I think at this point, we are not going to have a public hearing. If something surprising, unknown suddenly pops up out of the blue, since we haven't approved it, there's the option to do that. But I don't think our board is inclined to have a public hearing. And we just need to focus on the site plan and perfecting it and completing the seeker process. So Ashley, should we poll the board in terms of whether we should start writing a neg deck, or do you need an opportunity, and does Sean need an opportunity? Do we all need an opportunity to review what's been submitted?
So you can, I think, poll the board and authorize the drafting of a neg deck this evening with the understanding that the information hasn't been reviewed, so if other things are going to be needed in order to finish that or put that together, it'll just have to be addressed.
Okay. So with that then, again, from my perspective, I don't see that there's anything being proposed that rises to the level of a significant adverse impact that we would necessarily need to prepare an environmental impact statement. I will express that I still feel that that site is very tight, and the two uses I'm not thrilled about. But from a purely seeker perspective, I don't know that we need an EIS and that we need to issue a positive declaration. So I would, recommend that we allow our consultant to begin drafting a neg deck, and then we'll fill it in as we go along. Board members?
I feel the same. We need a motion.
You can do a motion. Motion to authorize.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Noreen?
Bonnie Franson,
Yes?
Nick Napoli,
Yes.
Pat Shea,
Aye.
Steve Thaw.
Aye.
Okay, so with that, we will have Ashley and Sean craft a draft of a negative declaration. We'll continue to review the project. I realized Jeff recused himself, which is why I was getting a little confused why I didn't hear one more opinion. At this point in time, it's 6:44. I kind of like to wrap it up because Jeff can't participate in this application and I need to head out. So if it's all right, I would say that I think we've addressed at least what we need to address from my perspective. But if you all want to, well, I would say we carry this over to the August meeting then.
Madam Chair, two things. One is the tree plan needs to be referred to the Conservation Committee by code. I had a discussion with Ashley about that, and I understand there is a meeting on Thursday, last Thursday of the month.
Let's make sure that happens, Noreen.
And the final thing is we would like to begin drafting a resolution that covers site plan approval and conditions, recognizing that you ultimately have to make that determination, but at least providing a framework for you to consider at your August meeting.
I would need to speak to our attorney about that.
We'll begin preparing it, and maybe your attorney will review it.
I think you can always work toward it, George. We just haven't discussed it, and I really do need to leave, unfortunately.
Our work here is done. Have any idea when you're back?
I have a 7 o'clock meeting. I don't know how long it's going to go. I really don't. As soon as I know that meeting is over, I'm going to text Ashley and Noreen to let them know that I'm on my way back. I'm hoping in an hour. I just don't know, but I'm not far from where I have to be. All right. All right, all. I have to get off, and I think with that, we'll move on to the next agenda item so Jeff can take over as far as chairing the meeting.
Later, Bonnie.
All right. Night, Bonnie.
Thank you all. Bye.
See you later.
Next application on our agenda is Pilati Village.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Morgante. I'm the engineer who's representing this application before this planning board tonight.
Evening, Mike. Can you bring us up to date with where we're at and what's gone on since our last meeting?
Sure, I'd be glad to.
Thank you.
So, subsequent to the prior meeting, we scheduled some soil testing with Sean Arnott's office for the stormwater facilities. That was completed. They observed the testing. Everything passed accordingly. We did receive some additional traffic comments from the planning board traffic consultants, which I believe our consultant addressed a majority of those. There may be a couple of, cross your T and dot your I kind of comments left, but I would suggest it's well over 98% complete. We did receive a landscaping review from Karen Arendt's office. It's a good thorough review. We are almost completed with the revisions to the plans that would take into account that comment letter. We received some hydrogeologic comments also. I believe our hydrogeologists responded in an email that they took no exception to the comments that were provided by the town's consultant. So we'll move forward to address those and hopefully start the commencement of the well testing in the near future. We have made good progress also with the Department of Environmental Conservation. I recently forwarded some correspondence to both the town and the town's consultants. We had to put together public participation plan. It's referred to as a PPP. That PPP essentially takes into account environmentally disadvantaged areas. Believe it or not, the north side of Harriman Heights Road, where our project sits, falls within this zone. So we have to have a separate video teleconference via the DEC, and I've provided the documentation to the town. I suggest that you guys read it, take a look at it, because I learned a lot myself from it, so I don't know how well-versed I am to give a detailed explanation as to what it is. But it's related to the wastewater treatment plants, essentially, that are there, and somehow upgrading the speedies permits for those particular facilities triggers this PPP plan and notification to the nearby residents of what's going on. And we have to hold a video teleconference. Essentially, it's a private public hearing for the public. We have mailings we have to send out. The dates, I believe, are August 14th and the 6th or the 8th. It's in the plan. So that's been dealt with. We had a site visit with Dave Tompkins, the town's wetland consultant and habitat specialist. Everything on the site checked out. There was one small additional area that we're adding to the plan. If you guys are familiar with the southern entrance on the southern site, there's a fence line. So there's a little bit of area inside the fence line that falls on our property line that needs to be added. We've already flagged that, mapped that. It appears that we can keep the Army Corps of Engineers disturbance to less than 1/10 of an acre cumulative between both sites. So we'll be hopefully mapping that and submitting for a nationwide permit to the Army Corps of Engineers shortly. And that updated mapping will be provided to the town also, obviously. We provided also some additional information for truck filling operations. One of the comments we received from Sean's office was the height of the fills, the cuts and fills for the site. We did provide a quantity of fill for both the northern site and the southern site, and we've also provided what we feel would be a typical truck filling program, or at least the quantity of trucks that would be arriving at the site per day. I would note that AKRF commented on that, and I think in their comment letter. So we're looking at approximately, I think it's around 40,000 cubic yards on the northern site and roughly 60-ish on the southern site. So that's what we're looking at there. I mean, that kind of summarizes essentially everything we've covered. So we've made super good progress with the plans. I would note that Sean's site plan comment letter noted that there was a SWIP comment letter we should be receiving. I don't know if you have a hard copy of that? Okay, I didn't get that part, so I'll come and get it now. Other than that, that's all I have to report back at this point.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to turn it over to our consultants for their comments at this point. Sean, if we could start with you.
Sure. I agree with the items related to our review, specifically the stormwater review of the on-site soils. I agree with Mike that they did perform as expected, or I should say as proposed in Mike's SWIP. We did provide our SWIP comments. I would say they're mostly technical in nature. I think we're getting pretty close on the stormwater aspect. I did reach out to Dave Tompkins pursuant to his visit of the site and the wetlands, and Dave essentially concurred with Mike's representation that there was a small amount of wetlands to be added. I would like to add that wetland area A, the town buffer was not added on the site plan, so that'll have to be updated. Dave did say that he's waiting on the revised wetlands report and habitat report in order to be able to comment and give his input on, based on the site visit. Hydrogeologist, yes, as Mike stated, the town's hydrogeologist, Frank Getchell, commented earlier this week on the plan that was submitted, And as Mike said, the hydrogeologist for the applicant said that he did take no exception to those items and was already considering using those. So at this point, we're really waiting on Orange County Department of Health to review the water aspects for each side of the road, as there's going to be 2 different potable water supplies for each side in order to basically get their feedback and understanding that the potable water supplies are viable for each side, to make sure that that's
So we should, at a minimum, complete the well testing, the 72-hour pump testing. I mean, I would imagine that if the well testing is adequate and we get the proper capacity, we'll also have quality testing that's associated with that. Typically, the quality testing will determine if I have to, what my parameters are that I have to design for water treatment. Being that I can see where the capacity would be something that the board would be interested in as it relates to the seeker process. But once we know we have capacity, the treatment portion of it would be an outside agency review. So I would hope that we could consider at that point, some type of a neg deck or some type of scheduling of a public hearing. I wouldn't want to wait for a final review from the health department.
Agreed. I think it would be fair to get some reaction from Department of Health to make sure that there's no contaminants in the water quality, to make sure that there's nothing substantial that has to be addressed treatment-wise. And then with regards to DEC, as Mike stated, he did copy the board on the submissions for the wetland disturbance to the DEC-regulated wetlands, as well as the wastewater treatment plants, and we'll be looking for their response to the latest round of submission. Otherwise, I did have some minor comments with regards to lighting, and we did receive comments from Karen today, I think it was, or maybe it was yesterday. But
Well, I didn't get those yet. I wouldn't imagine there would be new ones, though.
Sorry, I'm confusing that with BJ's. So
Okay.
So at this point, that's all I have. Basically from a secret perspective, as we're trying to pursue a potential negative declaration for the project. So,
Thank you. Ashley?
Nothing really additional. It's still in the seeker process, so you're that information, well testing, a negative declaration. I know that at one point the DEC requested a threatened and endangered species be sent to them as well. I think it was in their lead agency notice, so just to make sure that's sent to them as well when you.
I believe that was sent to them quite a while ago, yeah. I'm pretty sure at this point we have a complete application with the DEC. I'm waiting for them to confirm, but I think everything I've submitted has been sufficiently, it meets their needs, basically.
So just for process-wise for the board, so the next step will ultimately be the seeker completing that if it's going to be a negative declaration, or that would end the seeker process. If it was a positive, you'd go through the EIS procedures, and then the step that would be made under the So we'd have to go through those different considerations that are in the zoning code, and the board would evaluate and report back to the town board on whether you are recommending a landing of the zone for this property.
Thank you. Any of the board members have questions for Mike at this point?
I have one question, Mike.
Thanks, Pat.
I know we've gone over the traffic study ad nauseum, but can you remind me on the study for senior adult housing, what percentage do we expect of the houses or the entities to be senior adult?
All right, you're drilling down a little deep for the
Sorry.
site engineer on that one. I mean, I can find out and get back to you on that. I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
But to be clear, so I can write it down, you earned the percentage of what again?
So this is I did a traffic study for the Palatine for senior adult housing and multifamily development, and I'm just trying to figure out the percentage of anticipated senior development housing versus multifamily.
So the percentage of anticipated senior adult housing versus multifamily.
Right, in the past.
And how the traffic is split up such? Okay.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it has,
The overall percent,
yes.
it was going to be, and correct me if this is wrong, but I believe it's 100 unit senior housing and then 78 mixed housing.
Majority of senior adult housing.
Correct. Yes.
Board, you do have your traffic consultant on the Zoom if you had any questions or wanted to hear from them.
I don't think we want to punish everyone here, you know?
The applicant's representative's correct. We are pretty close on the traffic study, buttoning that up as far as, getting some figures adjusted and such. But we did have, at the end of our latest memo, a reminder that we had some site plan related comments that I don't think were fully addressed yet by Mike's office. And Alex is on, if, Alex can elaborate on those. Unless it was just Mike, you just didn't get around to adding them in yet.
Yeah, no, it's
I wasn't
just,
sure.
it's just, sorry if I'm a little loud there. It's just, I was focusing more on the SWIP comments for this last submittal, but I should be able to address them in the next submittal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. This is Alex Hall from AA Care Up, and just to follow up with Aaron, we did have one additional comment related to the construction-related trips memorandum. We just were requesting a bit more detail in terms of the proposed increase in truck traffic, particularly along Harriman Heights Road. The memorandum did provide truck trip estimates, but we just want to get a feel for what the truck composition is on that roadway now, just to get a feel for what the increase in truck traffic would be. Typically along a New York State roadway usually has a higher composition of trucks, so adding additional trucks along those roadways would not be noted as greatly as they would be along, let's say, a smaller county road. So that's just one item that we had requested, just to get a feel for what the increase in truck traffic would be along Harriman Heights Road and how it would fit in with the composition of the roadway.
We saw that comment. We'll address that for our next submittal.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
So in relation to the truck traffic, during construction is what we're really talking about, would we primarily expect those trucks to be coming up Harriman Heights Road, up Orange Turnpike, coming multiple directions into the site?
There are borrow pits south of us, so potentially truck traffic could come up 17 and come through the back way of Orange Turnpike. There are borrow pits right around locally in Monroe that we might source from. It probably is going to be a little bit of a mix. I can't say for sure at this point where we're going to be obtaining fill from, but I would say it's going to be, a majority of it will be local and or to the south, and I would anticipate most of those trucks, like I said, would probably come up 17 and the back way through Orange Turnpike.
So as well. Nick, any questions?
Nothing right now.
Steve?
All done.
Oh, sorry. Steve?
Not at this time.
I wanted to ask something about, I was looking through the EAF, and I just want to get some clarification. So in talking about, will the proposed action use or create a new demand for water? And of course, the answer is yes. Under that, it talks about name of district or service area. There is no district name. There are existing public water supply wells on both sites. Remind me again about those public water supply wells on the site. That's what's going to be supplying the project, right? Those aren't providing other areas of the town right now.
No, those existing wells that are both on the northern and southern site existed for the structures that were previously there. We took a look at those. We took a look at the casing, the depths. We just felt, based on the design we were providing and the anticipated yield, to drill new wells. So any of those existing wells that are on the site currently, we will keep them during pump testing for part of our monitoring program, but ultimately they will all be abandoned. And there will be 2 new additional wells on the northern site, 2 new additional wells on the southern site.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I know you were proposing to do some more well drilling, so those will all be abandoned?
All abandoned.
Okay, so then my other question is sort of immaterial with that. Ashley, so anything we need to further get done tonight? I mean, I think we're up to speed. I think a lot has happened since our last meeting, and we're getting sort of down to the nitty-gritty.
I feel so. I feel we're very close. I would imagine at this point, we've provided the board with enough documentation. I don't suspect that anything in part 2 of that EAF is possibly changing. I know we had done like a preliminary review and had gotten some feedback. It seems like I would imagine the studies that we're providing at this point are further, confirming, I think, some of the decisions we've made.
Already.
Just wanted to make sure that I discussed that with the board and the consultants and make sure there's anything we need to review or consider, so there's no surprises at the meeting next month. We would expect to be here next month and hopefully have the pump testing done. Maybe we'll have water quality results at that point, depending on when we get started with the pump testing. But we would like the board to consider at that point, if we're far enough down the road, that neg deck and scheduling a joint public hearing between the town board and the planning board.
So Ashley, as part of that process, would we do a re-review of part 2, do a formalized review of part 2, now that we have all the information in front of us, so that we
Yes, and
could
then-
make that determination?
Authorize the drafting of a negative declaration.
So I would encourage the planning board members in preparation for that meeting that you review that Part 2 EAF that we have kind of gone through once on this project, sort of informally, just to be prepared with any thoughts and final questions and things like that, so we can move forward.
There were some various questions there that you were waiting for the additional information, so some of them hadn't been answered, so some of that information, I know the well testing you're still waiting for, so I think probably once that's all before you, you could go back and answer what wasn't answered, and then also confirm nothing's changed and proceed that way.
Anything else we can do for you tonight, Mike?
Done plenty.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good night, everybody.
Appreciate your time. Okay, our next application is Monroe Commons. Good evening.
My name is Mark Seamers. I'm Peter Sack here representing the applicant. One moment, I would like to pass out this 11 by 17 of the plan from April 2020 that was used as the basis for the SECRA positive declaration determination, which will help highlight some of my points tonight.
This is located on Ninninger Road, where Lake Region Tire used to be, the property next to that. It's an 18-acre property. Between there and there's a new 4-story blue building. So it sits in kind of a mostly triangular shaped property there that's bordered, it's part of the town of Monroe, of course. It's bordered on the back diagonal edge by the town of Woodbury or village, town of Woodbury, and on the other side, on the other side of the triangle, not on the road, is town of Palm Tree. Village of KJ. I think it's coterminous, but yeah, I think it's coterminous there, so it's both. Is that correct? That's so? Am I correct on that?
That is my understanding.
Right. So Village of KJ and Town of Palm Tree share the same border there. Okay, Mark.
Okay.
It's been a while since we've spoken about this application.
Yeah,
Let's
so,
see where we're at now.
I believe the last time this project appeared in front of the entire board was sometime late last year. Since that time, we've held a number of technical work sessions with Bonnie and the consultants, as well as some consultants on our side of the table. Each work session led to a different plan revision in an effort to reduce the impact of the proposal on the land. as it was originally proposed when the board declared the secret positive declaration. In addition to that, the owners of the project has petitioned the town board with a request to revise the zoning in the heavy industrial zone. It's my understanding that this is one of the very last parcels that is developable in the heavy industry zone. And this petition requests that the town board restore the maximum building height from 40 feet back to 50 feet, which was reduced during the last zoning revisions that were adopted. Also, the petition requests that the zoning includes a provision in the HI zone to allow the planning board to reduce the parking requirements by 40% so as to eliminate a huge area of impervious surface that will never ultimately be used. And third, to revise the maximum lot coverage from 65% to 75%. All of this work has resulted in the plan that is before you tonight. The revisions to the plan in front of you tonight, in a nutshell, are we have revised the previously proposed loop road that comes in off of Ninninger Road and ran basically all the way around the project. We have tightened that up to the loading dock area and flipped the bank parking spaces to the east side of that loop road, allowing us to preserve or not disturb much more area to the east side of the proposed project. That open space area now is approximately 2 acres, which, if you look at the plan that was POS-decked in 2020, is completely covered in parking lot areas. We have also provided a tiered retaining wall along the eastern entrance coming off of Ninninger Road. Each retaining wall is separated by approximately 5 to 6 feet, which will allow us to do some landscaping in there and break up the wall face with some green area. We have realigned and revised the parking areas for the second and third floor areas to make this parking more efficient. In doing so, we were able to achieve more parking spaces in a smaller area and be able to open that area up a little bit, providing more green space between the areas for the second and third floor parking, as well as realign the access drive and the parking on the west side of the first story parking, just providing a more efficient layout for that parking and reducing the impervious surface. In addition to those items, we have removed the 27 space parking lot, which was west of the proposed building. The project applicant would like to provide a nice entrance to the second floor there. And what we did was, instead of providing an entrance area with sitting and a large retaining wall, we extended the building a little bit in that area, and we are now providing an additional retail storefront on the first floor. And the second floor will have a sitting and walking access area for the second floor. This will also allow us to use that side of the building as a retaining wall, rather than just a retaining wall and wasted space. And it also provides, if you compare that to the plan that was POS-decked in 2020, it allows us to actually provide more green space around the access loop road that runs through there. Again, providing some more green space around the building. So as I said, this plan has greatly reduced the grading and impact that runs around the proposal and the proposed parking areas. We have removed many of the retaining walls that were basically surrounding the property. The new plan proposes to grade into the Woodbury property. We understand that that will make Woodbury an involved agency in the secret process. At this point in time, we are just showing grading with a swale at the bottom to divert the stormwater that comes off of the Woodbury property. We are leaving the option open to do a combination of a smaller retaining wall, such as a 6-foot retaining wall with a swale above it. But we wanted to show you this proposal tonight because this would basically be the maximum land disturbance that is going into Woodbury. It is my understanding that some consultants working on our side of the table have spoken to members in Woodbury, and they are aware that this proposal exists, and we will be proceeding forward to Woodbury once we reach that point. We have also, if you compare the two plans, we have also greatly reduced the parking that is required. That is being done with the petition that was sent to the town board for the 40% parking waiver, and that is supported by a study that was prepared by Creighton Manning. It's a parking study that shows that based on this building size and these uses and comparing it to similar uses in the area, the minimum recommended parking spaces project would be. Currently, code requires 1,088 spaces, which is much more than we ever anticipating needing. We are proposing to construct 624 spaces, which is 188 more spaces than the minimum recommended, as well as banking 29 spaces, which we don't anticipate will ever be used. And that really allows us to greatly reduce the impervious coverage on the site. I did get a advanced copy of the AKRF comment letter, and I did go through it, and I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments on that. There is a comparison on the second page that compares the current project, and as it's shown in front of you tonight, to the plan from April 2020. And as you come down the bullets on the second page, it says the impervious area has increased from 8.71 acres to 9.79 acres. The reason that appears like that is because the plan in April of 2020 did not calculate the banked parking spaces as impervious surface because we had not yet received the determination from the building inspector and or the planning board that the bank parking was required to be calculated as impervious surface. So the actual impervious surface from the April 2020 plan was 12.57 acres. And that provided a coverage of 93.8% under the code as it's written. The current plan that's in front of you now proposes 9.79 acres of impervious surface, which is 2.8 acres less than what was under the POSDEC plan. And we now provide a 73.06% coverage, which is a 20.7%. So tonight we wanted to bring the revised plan in front of you that we have been working with consultants and Bonnie on, answer any questions that you may have, and ask that before we move forward with the full design, full bore, all consultants going on this plan, ask that you consider deeming the revised project in front of you as the preferred alternate to be studied under the DEIS.
On your comments?
Sure. So first off, I just wanted to note this area here. This is the banked parking that Mark is referring to. You can kind of see it shadowed. There is significant grading here before the banked area would be constructed, here and here, where the bank parking is. My concern with the viability of constructing that bank parking, which is something that Mark will have to consider in his stormwater design, is how that grading could affect where the location of this stormwater pond. So, that's something for Mark to work out, but I just wanted to note it now. And then, as Mark had noted, I guess there is a secondary plan or hybrid plan on the back side along the Woodbury boundary that could reduce the amount of grading into Woodbury. That could be an option for the board to consider in the future, if you select this alternative. So to the point that the Village of Woodbury would be a involved agency, I think that's for two matters. One is for the disturbance within Woodbury would require likely a clearing and grading permit if they have that provision in their zoning, or site plan within the village. Secondarily, the Village of Woodbury would have a stake in the stormwater review as they are an MS4. So they will have to, assist in reviewing the SWIP and sign off on it prior to construction. Really, that was the extent of my comments. It's, it's kind of a board's call as to, what plan they prefer, so.
Ashley?
Aaron from AKRF as well.
I'm here. Hi, everybody.
Aaron, sorry, would you like to provide some comments?
I can just summarize the memo I sent around this morning. It's long-winded, but the purpose of it was just to point out that we are aware of the changes and just remind the applicant and the board that, this was POSDEC about almost 2 years ago. And, just especially with the addition of the new proposed zoning text amendments, I just wanted to remind folks that there is a chapter that we'd scoped in the DEIS that is meant to address the district-wide implications of that change. Since it won't just apply to this site, it would apply to any other site in the HI zone where it could apply. That's been in there already from the scope. These two new amendments obviously are not. So just putting the applicant on notice to remind them that they have to address that as part of the DEIS. Otherwise, no other comments at this time because we don't have anything to review.
Thank you. Ashley?
So as far as seeker goes, you did previously identify the Village of Woodbury as an interested agency, but they had consented, I believe, to your acting as lead agency, but the planning board was not previously identified, so they would now be added as an involved agency. And for purposes of that, I could send just a supplemental notice to the planning board, making them aware of this. They already are, I believe, it seems, based on the discussions from the applicant's consultant, but we could send them a supplemental notice, just asking that they consent. That way it's all part of the record. And that's really it for that. I think the applicant's looking for some direction from this board as to the plan before you this evening before they delve further into the DEIS.
All right, so I'm going to start. I think the plan has come a ways from what we were originally presented. I feel like the wetland area makes more sense in how that's being handled, particularly after we did our site walk on the property and seeing what's really there already. This seems more in keeping with respecting what already exists. I like that we're looking at reducing the amount of impervious surface and the overall parking, pursuant to us really looking at what Crichton Manning is submitting to back up that the need for parking doesn't exist, or it doesn't exist to the level that the code might recommend. I'm curious what's gone on as far where you are in the process with the town board. I know it's long been a part of the conversation to have the town board reconsider the height in the HI zone, and I've read what's been submitted to support that. But also now we're talking about increasing the planning board's authority on a possible reduction in the amount of required parking and looking to come up in the amount of impervious surface. is it going to take, and I guess what I need to know is it going to take a increase to 75% and a reduction in the amount of required parking by 40% to pull off this plan?
Reduction of parking reduces our proposal to 73%. Now, I know that there has been, I am coming into this project a little bit late here. I took over in March, I believe. But I know that there has been a lot of discussion between the board, the building inspector, consultants, et cetera, on how the lot coverage should be calculated. I know that there has been a lot of discussion on gross area versus net area, how the bank parking should be addressed, et cetera. So that was all taken into consideration with working in the technical work sessions and with the town board to get to this point. So the short answer to your question is yes, it does require both of those things to take place. I wasn't present Monday night, the project attorney was, but it's my understanding that that petition did appear in front of the town board on Monday, and the town board has gotten to the point where they will be circulating that petition to the planning board and to the county for comment.
Okay.
So that's where we are on that part.
Right, and I know that in the most recent version of the petition, the idea that for the HI zone, only looking at gross lot area and not taking into some of the environmental constraints was dropped from the petition, and I appreciate that. I mean, I think that's very consistent with how we treat all of the land here in the town of Monroe, and I think that's an important
Right, so it will
understanding.
It will be calculated based on net area under the calculation in the zoning code, as well as counting the bank spaces as impervious surface.
Now, I understand that you've changed your thoughts on grading and the large retention wall behind the project on the border of Woodbury. If Woodbury ultimately isn't amenable to what you're proposing in grading on their land, do we revert to the very large retaining wall? And if so, is this proposal harmonious with that large wall if that was necessitated because there was no other alternative for how to grade the rest of the space?
Yep, and that is definitely a fair question. What we have to do, as far as I see the project, is we have to go through our steps. We have to check our boxes. And right now, we are at the point where we need the feedback from the board, whether this will be our preferred alternate from your board, and then we could proceed to Woodbury. If we get to that point where we have to cross that bridge that they are not willing to allow that grading, then we'll have to look at the retaining wall and possibly revise the layout or make a retaining wall work.
I mean, I certainly feel myself that this new option where the wall has gone away, where it's graded into the existing slope. Like I said, we had an extensive site visit out to the land. I climbed to the top of the ridge line. I might have actually gotten into Woodbury at one point, I'm not sure. But I think it will work much better in that space and in the spaces around that. I'm also, I know it's a little picayune at this point, but I know that there's a good provision for walkway space into the development that is going up next door. I'm a little concerned about pedestrian traffic or possibly bicycle traffic coming off of Nininger from other areas, including Woodbury Junction. One of the entrances to Woodbury Junction comes out on Nininger on the far side of a small rise, past where the old Lake Region Tire was and a couple of old homes. And I could certainly see residents from that neighborhood possibly traveling to this site on foot. And I would like to see as much in every project, I like to encourage the ability for people to walk or bike in addition to drive to that space. And frankly, I think that would support your contention that I don't need as much parking space. If I can provide for people to get there in a safe manner and travel through the area on site with where there's automobile traffic safely, either by bike or by foot or other modes of transportation as people see fit. Other board members, questions, comments?
The only question I have, and I brought it up the last time we talked about this, is who is going to make the decision on traffic for Nininger and the other roads there? Is that within our purview, or is that the county, or what?
County will have inputs.
Say again?
The county will have input since it is their road, especially on the modifications to within their right of way. You know, the board has to consider it as part of secra. So, so I would say you jointly with the county would have to consider the traffic.
Okay, so that's a little bit further down the line, I guess.
Yeah, as the plan develops, you know, I think the site plan has to develop more, and the traffic study has to be completed before, you know, the board should consider traffic. So
most of
the EIS scoping document has the traffic study as part of it. We've been in contact with Creighton Manning to review some of their existing conditions, assumptions, and their trip generation. Just informally, you know, getting back to them about those assumptions before they go full on the traffic study. And obviously, the plan has to be, you know, blessed by the board too before they can proceed further. But we've been in discussions with Creighton Manning, and the scoping document from 2020 is a pretty robust traffic study in it. Scope anyway.
Very good, thank you.
Steve?
Just to build upon real quick what Pat said as far as the traffic study, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here, I just want to make sure it's done at a time of year when it's appropriate as far as the school bus traffic on Nininger Road. As we all know, that Nininger Road at the traffic light where you make the left towards the middle school and high school becomes significantly backed up during school times, mornings and afternoons. So I just wanted to make sure that that traffic study by Creighton Manning does include the time of year when school is in session, as opposed to now during the summer when it's low travel.
Nick?
Nothing from me.
Just as a comment for Pat and Steve, from the very beginning of this project, traffic has been a big part of the conversation. When we first started on this project, the pandemic was coming to bear, and one of our big concerns was that we get a realistic picture of a normalized traffic situation, and to echo what Aaron just commented, it's a big aspect of what the EIS, since we made a pause deck on this and we're going through a full EIS, all of these things will be considered at great length. And so I guess I'd want to just check with each of the board members now to see what your, are you favorable to the applicant moving forward with this version of the plan as presented tonight? Nick?
Yeah, I just probably need more time to look at each option and really weigh the pros and cons.
Pat?
We don't see too many changes from the last study. I have the last map right in front of me here as well. I am a little bit confused as to traffic flow there. On the first plan you had, it looked like it was a one-way traffic. Is that still the case, or is it two-way traffic now coming off Nininger Road?
I'm not sure which. The way on the April 27th, 2020 plan that was received the positive declaration. This is all wide with a left and right turn lane coming out of the project. The west entrance, which I call the secondary entrance, is also a two-way traffic coming to a intersection inside the parking lot. So all the roads are wide enough to provide for two-way traffic. So traffic flow does go all the way, loop all the way around.
All right, I think I was just reading the first plans inaccurately, so I see what you're saying now. Yeah. So I have no more questions about that.
Steve?
I have no other further questions at this time.
All right, so since I'm the one with the most history on this plan, I'd like to put forth to the board that that this is an improved plan from what was originally presented to us, that although it's nuanced, it's not a huge difference from what we initially saw. Similar building in size and in form. There's been a considerable amount of work on changes to parking, coverage, the wetlands area, and hopefully the removal from the plan to be able to move forward with grading into Woodbury rather than doing a massive retention wall. So I would propose that the board consider that we ask the applicant to move forward with this version of the plan as our preferred model. Is that something that we
Need a motion there?
I don't know that you need a motion.
I think we're just trying to get a sense.
Yeah,
Would the rest of the board be amenable to that?
I am.
I would ask that you do a motion to authorize me to send a supplemental lead agency notice to the Village of Woodbury Planning Board. That way they're
Process moving there.
identified.
I'll make that motion. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Nick.
That motion was
We want to be able to include
We're going to
the,
send we had not identified the Village of Woodbury Planning Board as a lead agency, as an involved agency when we circulated back in whatever year that was. So I want to just get them, at least have their consent for the record, so it's clear they'll be. And I heard a motion in a second.
Napoli?
aye.
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 Anything else we can accomplish tonight, Mark?
I
All right.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one.
All right, our next application is the Rye Hill Project. Thank you, gentlemen. Before you get started, if I may, just as a reminder to the board and for the benefit of the public, I just want to speak a moment about where we're at in this process. So there is a petition in front of the town board currently to land the CCR zone on the Rye Hill Preserve. At this point, no application has been submitted to the planning board and can't be until that decision has been made. Our role at this point is as an advisory board to the town board because of our expertise on things like environmental review and considerations like that. We're hearing from the applicant to get introduced to this project and really make two considerations, I guess I would describe it as. Number one, we're ultimately going to be asked to consider whether to recommend to the town board that they do land the CCR zone for this project, and also to bring to light anything that we feel is important to them in making that decision. So that is our mission at the moment. Should that get landed, and then the applicant will be back to us for a full application, and we'll go through our normal process at that point. So with that being said, if you would reintroduce yourselves and bring us up to speed with where we're at tonight.
Just one thing, you might.
Thank you, Pat.
Just for the purpose of the people here that are not, haven't been to many planning board meetings, just define what CCR is.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Lingo. CCR is what's considered a floating zone here in the town of Monroe. It was created by law last year. It's conservation cluster residential. Our town currently provides for a conventional type of layout and a cluster type of layout. Well, this was created by law. In a regular cluster layout, there's increased density in return for the setting aside of lands. The first project that we were talking about, we had preferred the cluster layout, and 50% of the land would be preserved under that process. You would have the same number of houses as you would normally, but in a more dense build than you would have under that conventional plan. Well, CCR takes that to the next step. What it does is it provides for a minimum of 65% of land being set aside permanently as conserved. There's multiple methods of doing that, and it allows for increased density on the land that is built on. So that's what's before the board now, a petition to consider whether this land, whether these properties are appropriate for that type of zoning. A floating zone means that normally a zone, like where you live, there's a zone, and whatever the zone is, the zone. Well, the floating zone says, based on certain qualifications, land all over the town could be a part of that zone if the board chooses, and that sort of becomes an overlay on what the normal zoning would be. I hope that helped at all. Thank you, gentlemen.
Hey, thank you very much, Chairman Manson, for that introduction. And members of the Planning Board and the public, good evening. My name is Jeffrey Buss. I am an attorney with Smith, Buss & Jacobs. Our law firm represents Sunbrook Partners, which is the applicant for a zone change before the town board. With me this evening, I also have Fred Munt, who is an engineer with PS&S Engineering, who has been assisting us in preparing the rezoning proposal. And as you discussed initially, the concept here is to create, through the use of zoning, large swatches of open, preserved land. And you do that by scrunching housing into a smaller area so that the density in that area is going to be greater than it would otherwise be. The property as presently zoned, I believe, would support over 172 or maybe more single-family homes on larger tracts of land. The town previously approved an environmental impact statement on July 13th of 2020 for this floating zone, using this parcel of land as the tentative study. Under the proposal as we're doing it, if you remember from the drawing last time, we kind of break the property into three areas. Eagle Ridge, where we're planning on putting apartment buildings, Shea Meadows, where we're planning on putting 191 townhouses, and the balance of the property, which is approximately 154 acres, we're going to dedicate through conservation easements and deed restrictions as open space or park recreational space. That land with those restrictions cannot be used to build anything. There cannot be any further housing on that land. There could not be any shopping centers. There could not be any other development. The town could, and we did draw on our proposal, approximately 8.25 acre area for an active recreation area as a park, which is a permitted use for that. The remaining parcel, which is about 91 acres, actually has streams, and those are wetlands, and next to that is a 100-foot setback, an adjacent wetland area. When you add those properties together, it was a question that was asked last time by Chairman Franson, how large is that area? And our architects are saying it's approximately 37 acres. So if you add all those together, rather than 65%, we would actually be preserving approximately 78% of the property for open space or parks. And so what I wanted to do was kind of address what had occurred since we were here 3 weeks ago. The first request was that we prepare and have our traffic study submitted. We did get that to the town. We used the same firm that I've heard mentioned here a few times this evening, Creighton Manning. And you have that proposal in front of you somewhere. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it yet, but I don't think we're going to get into the details tonight. But that study, and I have the executive portion of it here, built on the 2019 study that was done by Nelson Pope, and it took those numbers and then added to them. We did not consider traffic during the pandemic because that is an outlier. It's not indicative of what the traffic is. So we increased it from the 2019, I think it was about 2% per year compounded. And then we were planning on beginning construction, if we get that far, in about 2024. And so we asked the traffic engineers to also consider, I believe it was the first project you were talking about this evening, the Palatine project, which is not that far away, to include that as part of the impact. Their conclusion was that even in the building year of 2024, that it would not have a significant adverse impact to add these homes to this area. There was a finding before that there may need to be stop signs placed, and we've adopted that. The town board, when they referred this matter to the planning board, said you should take a look at whether or not a traffic signal may need to be installed. We asked Creighton Manning to opine on that. It's a little different in that our study envisions apartment buildings on the Eagle Ridge, whereas the original one had them spread out. So the traffic signal that they were talking about, I think, was on Orange Highway. So that traffic actually went down. But whatever the planning board of the town recommends, we're willing to adopt it and provide and go forward with that. The major change that we made since we were here last time, because it was very clearly expressed professionally and politely by every town official and everyone in the room, that our request to build a higher building up to 53 feet in height was something that no one wants. No one. So we don't want to be a bad neighbor. We withdrew that request formally by filing both a notice of withdrawal with the town board and an amended petition with the town board expressly stating that we were withdrawing the 53-foot request and that we would abide by the 40-foot height limit for this property. The other thing that we did since we were here last time, let me just take a look. On the town board referral, there was a requirement or a request that the planning board consider compliance with certain issues in the environmental impact statement. First one is phasing plan, which is not going to build everything all at once. Sections over. Okay, thanks. That we would commence that before August of 2025. That is actually in the papers that we previously submitted, but I don't know if the town board picked it up, but that's done already. The second request was that we deal with a 40-foot height limitation. We've now agreed to that, so that's done already. The third thing was a provision of an updated response from the New York Natural Heritage Program and an assessment of any impacts to any species other than a northern long-eared bat. Actually went back to the environmental impact statement. The northern long-eared bat was not located on this property. It was discovered, I think, approximately 2 miles distant. But that's close enough so that we have to consider it. And the way we're developing the property, leaving that much property untouched and agreeing not to remove or take down any trees during the certain periods of the year complies with their requirements of what we need to do. We did contact the New York Natural Heritage Program. They don't have any other additional species listed as endangered. We've heard, and I think everyone here heard this evening, that there is some consideration on the federal level about preserving monarch butterflies. We don't think that would be an issue or a problem for us because of the huge amount of open space that we have and the type of plantings that are naturally there. We're not really going to be changing anything. So we don't think that's a problem, but we can address that in a little more detail if the board requires it.
Had a copy of that response from the New York Natural Heritage?
Yes. And then they asked that we put a map note on our master development plan, note tree cutting from April 1st through October 31st. I believe we did do that already, yes? Okay, that's been done already. Another request is that we minimize to the maximum extent possible disturbance around any of the stormwater ponds that are drawn in there for runoff, or the emergency access roads on Eagle Ridge and Shea Meadows. And we prepared and submitted on June 30th Exhibit 7, which is a limits of disturbance site plan exhibit. So that we've submitted, and you of course need to review it with us. They also wanted us to consider the utilization of native trees, shrubs, and plants. And that's what we're going to do. We have no requirement at this stage to comply with a detailed landscaping plan, but we're going to only use native or natural plantings around buildings and properties. And then the other two areas really relate to, or actually there's three left, wherever possible to use pervious materials that would absorb and allow water to penetrate as opposed to impervious. And we've done that, I think, pretty completely throughout our project whenever we possibly could. And the last two items related to the traffic study, and that was stop signs and considering whether a traffic light would be required. One issue which was not mentioned here, but I know it's a concern to the planning board and to the neighbors, was one of the apartment buildings, people think it's big, and it is, but we're going to make sure that it's not over 40 feet in height, which we think is all that's legally required. The zone that you've already approved and the impact statement that you've already approved provides that we can build the size and the number of units that we're putting in there. And actually, we've done our own calculations. We think we could actually put more, at least another 70,000 square feet, but we're not really comfortable doing that, or make more units, but we're not comfortable doing that. And in terms of the drawing, which shows like a large rectangle with a few little strange things sticking out of it, the architects are going to revise that as we go forward and we come back to you with a site plan. And I've asked them if they could redraw it in a way that would not present one large structure, and they're actually trying to figure out how they could do that. I think, I didn't realize you had the site up there, but in the top right-hand corner, that's the large building I was just referencing. And there's a road, an access road that kind of curves around the property closer to the residents who live over there. Everything is set back, by the way. We have a 70 or 75 foot setback. Nothing is closer than 115 feet. But if we, the reason that building looks so large is we wanted to try to put parking underneath the structure to make sure that we minimize the amount of impervious surfaces and we could meet the parking requirements. It is, I believe, theoretically possible to keep that parking on that kind of a footprint, but to space out and break up the buildings perhaps a little bit so that they're not one bulky building. And that might mean moving the road a little bit, and we just have to juggle those things back and forth. But that's something I think would be appropriately addressed in a site plan process. And I view this process and the site plan process as what I call interactive, meaning we're here to listen to what the town wants and what the neighborhood does and does not want on the property. And, I assume there's some people that would prefer to see it remain vacant forever. I hear you. That's okay. But that's not our proposal.
Folks, there's a listening session. Okay. Thank you.
And I would also direct the neighborhood to read the environmental impact statement that was approved. When you do an environmental impact statement, one of the things you consider is what happens if you build under the current zoning, what happens if you build under the alternative zoning, And what happens if nothing is done? And this town legally has already adopted an opinion that no development is not consistent with the needs of this town going forward or with the comprehensive plan that the town has already adopted. And, certainly we want to build something there. We don't want to leave it vacant. We wouldn't buy the land to leave it vacant. But we would like to build something that we could market and sell to the people in the community, and that would not only preserve large swatches of open space, but we're also committed to putting in 20% workforce affordable housing. So, that's another benefit that we want to give to the town. So, questions?
Well, and that's required as part of the CCR
Absolutely,
zone,
absolutely.
which is appropriate. Sean, can we go to your comments?
I have not received the hard copy of the plans yet, nor do I think the escrow was established yet. So fortunately, I do not have comments prepared for this evening.
Not a problem. Ashley, anything as far as process even?
So I think you gave a really good overview of the process when you started, as far as where you are. You're right now in the review recommendation stage, so you're hearing the proposal, and you'll have to go through, similar to Palatine earlier, the different factors that you have to consider under that conservation cluster zoning law. That would be the next step. I know you did address where you are with those issues that the town identified had to be addressed before the planning board did a recommendation. If you could submit a narrative just doing that so it's clear for the record, along with that heritage. Chair has rejoined the Zoom, I believe. Bonnie, are you on there? Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Bonnie.
Okay. So this item is going to be continued to our next August meeting? Has that been discussed?
No.
For the recommendation that ultimately needs to go to the town board?
Bonnie, we were really just getting to the point where I was going to turn it over to the planning board members to ask questions of the attorney and engineer so we can get a better understanding and maybe address some of our questions so that we can prepare for our next meeting to start discussing recommendations to the town board. So with your permission, I'd like to run through the planning board.
Yes. Yes, I'll go last.
Thank you. Steve, can we start with you?
Sure, I just had one quick question. You had mentioned the possibility of the breaking up of the large structure into smaller, in keeping with the height restriction of 40 feet. What do you envision? How many structures to accommodate the amount of apartments that you considered?
I think it would either be 3, most likely.
The large structure would be broken down into 3 smaller structures.
Right, but
the other building then would remain the same, is that correct?
Yes. There's not a whole lot of space here with all the wetlands and setback and open space requirements. So the only other space, there's only that I can see that we could build on, one is in the corner near Shea Meadows, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the other would be breaking up the conservation area. There is a parcel in there that might be developable, but to my opinion, goes contrary to the idea of keeping that large space preserved, and I don't want to do that.
And with the possibility of potentially breaking up that large building into 3 smaller buildings, how would that affect the 78% number of open green space?
it wouldn't change it, because if you look at that drawing where that footprint is, you can kind of see it on the light green areas, the streams, and then the buffer areas around it, between the parking and the streets and the buildings. There's very little space left to move anything around.
You're trying to keep those three structures within generally the same footprint as the initial large structure proposed?
Yes.
Okay. That's the only question I have.
Nick?
Yeah, I know, talked about that it wasn't going to be low-income housing, it's working class income housing. What's the threshold there? How much is the household?
There's something called the AMI, Adjusted Median Income, that is a federal standard. And I forget the numbers for all the different sizes, but for, I believe, a family of 4 in Orange County, it's $100,400 a year, something like that. We could, that would be a maximum. People could come in with less, but we were trying to gear it more towards. And in today's world, I thought the room was going to empty out when somebody said they found gasoline for $3 a gallon somewhere. I was going to open with that line so that I wouldn't have to answer any questions. But, things are very expensive, and affordable housing is almost a misnomer because every kind of housing has gotten to the point where very few people can afford it. So we think it's really important to maintain housing for people that are working and trying to start a family, so they can continue to live here, and also for retirees so they can live here.
Just if I may, on that note, just to circle around what you brought up at the last meeting, is you had stated that townhomes are going to be for private purchase. Is that correct?
It's our plan at the moment, unless interest rates go so high, in which case we'll rent them. But
And I think you mentioned at the last meeting that the apartments are going to be rental only?
yes.
Okay.
Pat?
Hopefully this isn't an inappropriate question. It's a little bit different, but who owns the land now?
There are 5 different LLCs. I forget their names as I'm sitting here. I could provide it to you. It's public information. They are not related to Sunbrook in any way. We negotiated and executed a contract with them. So their names are, Golden something, Eagle something. I forget what they are, but I'll get it for you.
So we're talking about all the property from the top of Rye Hill Road down to Prestwick Gardens and over to Orange Turnpike.
I believe that's correct. I'm not a local boy, so excuse me, but it's 245 acres almost. Is that right, Fred? Yeah. Yeah, 245 acre parcel there.
It's only really at the bottom of the property, at the bottom of the hill, that it stretches all the way from Rye Hill to Orange Turnpike. Most of the property runs along Rye Hill Road all the way to the top of the hill, but most of that, and certainly all of the conservation area, does not run all the way out to Orange Turnpike.
Say the top of the hill, I mean, it's not going to run all the way to the top of Rye Hill.
No, it's really closer to the intersection of Rye Hill and Berry.
Actually, I don't know who's controlling the screen, but if you could pull up the second screen, which is 2.1, it gives you kind of a view of the parcel.
And just to get the bearings, is the conservation area, are we talking about the lower part of Rye Hill or the upper part of Rye Hill towards Berry Road?
It's the upper part towards Berry Road.
Upper part, where it gets closer towards Monbassia Lake.
Correct, yeah. And on this drawing that's up there now, go back, please. Yeah. Make it a little smaller. Okay. So there's 3 different colors on that map, and the largest parcel, which is green, that would be the conservation area, and which goes towards the Monbassia Lake area. And then on the right side, that's blue and green, that is where the 2 apartment buildings would be located. That's the Eagle Ridge property. And then the property in between, I'm not sure what color that is, but that would be where the townhouses are, and that's the area that's the Shea property.
Would you mind actually approach
sure.
approach the screen and give that same review?
We need the microphone.
Jeff, just hold on a moment while we give you the wireless microphone. Sean, can you grab that for us?
It's where I get to sing, which will definitely empty out the room. And I don't know if you can leave this up here later, but this area here that I'm just circling with my finger is the entire conservation area. This area here, which is kind of brown, is going to be 191 townhouses. And this blue area here, the Eagle Ridge side, is where we're going to put the apartment units if we're allowed to do so.
Could you identify where Alex Smith Drive is? Like if you're coming up Rye Hill Road.
I can.
Yeah.
I may pass the mic to somebody who's more local to.
All right, just to help everybody get their bearings. I'm first going to show the board, but then for your benefit, I'll show you what I'm showing them. So just before I answer that question for you, Pat, it actually, the conservation area extends beyond the area where the intersection of Berry Road and Rye Hill, where the active recreation is proposed or at least slotted out at the moment. That's near that intersection. So you can see that it runs a little bit further along Berry Road. It's a lot of open fields up there and that kind of thing already. Alex Smith is here. This is High Ridge, just to give you, a sense of where you're at. Okay, well, I'm going to come around here and do the same spiel. All right. So there's a little area outlined in red. Some of you were here before. You may have seen some of this. This area is kind of laid out as a possibility for some active recreation, maybe some ball fields, a small amphitheater was on one of the proposed documents. This is the intersection where Berry Road breaks off from Rye Hill, where it makes that big turn. So you can see that the conservation area continues along Berry, not out as far as Berry Road Park and all that, but heading into that area. If you're familiar with the Rye Hill corridor, this is Alex Smith, which Pat was asking about, that runs into the top of Maple Knolls. And this is High Ridge here. So it's between Alex Smith and High Ridge where you get that border between where the townhomes are proposed and where the conservation area starts. So it's quite a bit at the top of Rye Hill, and then over the ridge line there is kind of along here, and this comes down a little bit, but not. It sort of flattens out over there. It's undulating at the top. And you can see this is, Orange Turnpike is here. The property doesn't actually extend all the way. There's a small access corridor off of Orange Turnpike. That's where the road would come in to the apartments on Eagle Ridge. And this is East Monbassia Road here and some of the roads off of that, just to give everybody an idea where everything is. I'm sorry, where's what? I have no idea.
Callaway is the small cul-de-sac off of Reynolds Road before you come to the intersection of Rye Hill.
Well, it's, okay, so this is Prestwick here. Orange Turnpike, you're probably looking in around here. It's in this area. And this is where Pat lives, right here. He's pretty familiar. And I grew up here, and Steve lives right here. That's what I know. But yeah, is that Prestwick or is that? Yeah, this is Prestwick. Yeah. Yeah, Hawkshurst is here. It comes off of Orange Turnpike just past, there's one property and then another corner property past where the entrance to Eagle Ridge would be, and then Hawkshurst is residential and runs all through there. Right, you can see a little bit of the golf course here. So that ought to echolocate everybody. Any more streets I've never heard of? in the last 54 years? Thanks. I'll work on that one.
Back to the ownership.
Yeah.
Back to the ownership thing there. Now, so the ownership is contingent, I guess, or the sale is contingent on approval?
We have the right to cancel the contract regardless of whether we get approval or not. So it's up to us if we want to cancel it. And, you know, we're trying to figure out, you know, does this work? And if we, you know, decide to go forward with a different layout, or maybe under the existing zoning, we would have the right to do that. But, you know, we really want to try this floating conservation cluster residential zone approach.
So in, I think it was 2006 or thereabouts, there was an approval for, a conditional approval for development of that property, all the way up to the top of Rye Hill Road, where it was all single-family homes?
Well, there were multiple proposals along the corridor, 7 different ones at various stages along the process with the town board, the planning board, the zoning board, from the early 2000s right up on through 2016 when the moratorium happened and we reevaluated zoning in the town and new things came to bear. No one had final approval as far as I understand, but there were a couple of conditional approvals for different aspects of that, but there were proposals all throughout this property, yes.
I understood there was conditional final approval back in 2007 before the property was sold. I think there was a guy named Severino that owned it, and then he sold it to the BMG and, you know, the LLCs. And I just wonder, you know, if you were not to go through with this, is that plan for conditional final approval still doable? Is it, when it's conditional final approval, do we have any say? Is there anything that could stop it?
So it depends, when you say conditional final, I'm assuming that a map hasn't been filed with the county because that would then be on record and the property would have already been subdivided. So it's likely that whatever approval was out there had expired.
Oh, well, that's possible, I guess, but, you know, they started to clear the property. They started to clear the property back in 2015, or just before the comprehensive plan. They actually started to develop the property. So I would assume that the county has a subdivision there. No? Well, that's what I'm trying to find out. What does conditional final approval mean?
It would mean that once the conditions are satisfied, the plat would get signed and then filed with the county. But if that's still in the conditional phase, that's indicating to me that they wouldn't have satisfied those conditions yet, so it wouldn't have actually risen to final approval.
And sometimes conditions never get satisfied. So you could have a conditional approval and just never meet those conditions.
And Bonnie has something to add on that.
So if you go to the Monroe Comprehensive Plan that was adopted in 2017, and you go to page 4-59 and 60, it lists the various development applications that were in front of the town at that time and what kind of approvals they had. BMG Monroe, which I believe was Smith Farm, is listed. Golden Ray, which I believe is one of the ones that was formerly Shea Meadows, that had final conditional subdivision approval. Rye Hill Estates, it was 10 lots, not approved. Eagle Ridge was 40 lots, and that had preliminary conditional subdivision approval. So this was essentially the status when the town entered into a development moratorium to put together the revised zoning and the comprehensive plan. And so this, as far as I know, was the status of those particular projects as of 2017, and then the zoning was changed.
So my question, Bonnie, would be if this plan is not approved and these folks don't buy the property, could the old Shea Meadows that was conditionally finally approved be built as it was approved?
My recollection, and we'd have to check with the attorneys at the time, no project was grandfathered. None of these projects were grandfathered. And the law was changed so that, for instance, you have to now subtract out environmental constraints. There's the mandatory cluster subdivision provision requirements. Some of the lots, the zoning was changed from 1 acre to 3 acre. The 1 acre zoning, it used to be a 40,000 square foot lot requirement. Now it's a true acre requirement of 43,560 square feet. So I believe if they were to come back, they would have to submit a subdivision that would comply with the zoning as it exists today, unless through some litigation, there's, some other consideration. But just purely speaking from a zoning perspective, if they didn't get approved, or they had approval, but they didn't file their maps, and they don't comply with the current zoning, so theoretically, they would have to submit plans that comply.
That's comforting. Thank you.
I certainly don't have that level of knowledge. I do have the findings from the 2020 environmental impact statement, and there's 2 paragraphs here that touch on what you were asking. One is, it says, it is anticipated that under the existing zoning, the development site could be built to accommodate 172 single-family units. So there would be the ability to build that, apparently. And then towards the end of that, section 2, it says the town board finds development under the existing zoning is not a viable alternative because it does not fulfill the town's land use and environmental goals and policies. Then it goes on to recommend that the conservation cluster zone is a better use and consistent with the town's comprehensive plan, which I believe you adopted 2019 or 2017, 2019, whatever.
16 or 17?
17?
17, and then, right. And it was just at the end of 17 that the new zoning law was put in place based on that. Bonnie, if it's okay.
This zoning that was put into place for this particular project was after adoption of the comp plan. It wasn't contemplated specifically in the comp plan. It was subject to its own seeker and planning and other review.
Bonnie, if it's okay, I'll ask my questions before we get to you. Is that all right?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So I understand that you're going to work within the 40-foot height that is applicable to this zone.
Yes.
We looked at some architecturals last time that showed some significant roofing that was part of the reason, as I understand it from your description, as to why you were looking for that change in the height. So what could we anticipate particularly the apartment buildings, looking like now under the 40-foot?
A relatively flat roof, I guess, is the simple answer to that. We're in the process of transitioning. The architect we're using is going to a different business, basically, I guess. Okay. So we're transitioning, his work. He's been very cooperative with us, but we'll come back with something that's a flat roof.
Okay. If you remember back to the joint meeting that we had between the planning board and the town board,
Yes.
when you were first introducing the concept, just for our introduction, one of the things that I had questioned was, since height of the building is an absolute concern, and we hear that over and over again, the possibility on the site of positioning any of the buildings, I guess from what I look at from the topo maps, it looks like the apartment buildings will sit at the top of slopes at the top of small ridges? And is there any possibility of moving those buildings at all downslope, which would reduce not the height of the building, but at least the apparent height of the building in the landform? And I was wondering if that was at all feasible or at all considered since I'd brought that up.
So that is one of the items that we're looking at. Just to reduce the height, we're looking at the flat roofs, and also, the last little bit of building height that we're considering is the slope that we're dealing with. So we're working with playing with that slope to make sure we minimize that apparent height as you're suggesting. The other thing that obviously we are contemplating at this point is trying to break up that overall mass, especially of the large apartment building, and in doing that and having some rotations of the building is going to allow us to deal with that slope a little bit better to help reduce that apparent height. And
deal with the massive look of one large building by, right.
Exactly.
It's working into the land and working into the space so that it's more in keeping with what would be there. All right. Honestly, I think that's all I have at this point, too. Bonnie?
Thank you. So I have some requests, which is if we could get some kind of comparison matrix that compares the type of units in the test case that was examined in the GEIS and what's being proposed now. Getting into details as far as how many seniors then, how many seniors now. I don't think there's enough information from my perspective, to understand the differences and the changes. And looking at this, for example, it looked like in terms of multifamily units, the test case had 248 multifamily units, of which 94 were going to be part of a senior apartment building, and obviously in a different location. In looking at the plans that were submitted, and I don't know what the unit count is now, given the changes that are going to be made to the two large buildings, it seems that there are 300 multifamily units that are proposed in those two buildings. So I would like to have a sense of what the breakdown is in terms of what was examined and what's being proposed. I think there also has to be some kind of visual examination of the two buildings, even if they are broken, down into smaller massing. That area, the eastern parcel, as it was referred to in the test case, proposed 124 townhome dwellings. And, that kind of massing is different than having two large buildings. And so I would like to understand, what the implications are for the adjoining residential neighborhood. The test case, they would have had 124 townhome units, and not all of them are facing toward the rear yards of the dwellings that are along Presswood Drive. Here, we're going from 124 to 300, and I don't know if they're elevated above those homes. I don't know how it affects their view shed, their privacy. I feel that we need cross sections, or we need more information with regard to that change. And whether it's positive, negative, because obviously there was going to be a long but smaller senior housing apartment building up along Rye Hill Road. And that would have been next to a couple of homes there. So, again, what are the implications? Essentially there looked like the senior aspect of this, because there was going to be a senior apartment building, it's unclear to me where the senior units are going in the new project. Based on the narrative, it seemed that there might be some in the multifamily, there may be some townhome dwellings that are made available to seniors, but really, how many senior units are being accommodated in this development? And in general, if you've made refinements and revisions to the layout, and if you've changed the mix and the type of units, or the type of what was anticipated to be owner versus rental, what kind of analyses, what kind of market study was done to document the demand or the need for the units that are being proposed? The market changes all the time, and 10 years ago, what I heard was needed is different from 5 years ago, is different from 2 years ago. And, to what extent does this in fact meet the demand, meet the market demand so that it won't be changed later? And to what extent does it meet the demand for the town of Monroe? So I'd like more information on that. But again, I think fundamentally, it would just be useful to have a comparison of what the GEIS considered, what the test case was, and how this project differs from that. And I think we then need to evaluate the delta from a seeker perspective and from an impact perspective. And again, in particular, I'd like to understand the community character effect, especially with regard to the buildings that are, from my perspective, different than what was in the test case and what was examined. While you may be staying within certain thresholds, in the test case, the reality is the layout is different. And again, that has seeker implications. So that's my comment. And I'd like to get that sooner than later so that we can consider that when we prepare our recommendations to the town board.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I'm not sure how we would work with your counsel or your outside consultants, Mr. Arnott, or yourself or board members. I heard earlier about technical workshops. I'm not sure if that really applies when we're not doing a site plan. We did meet what we understand to be all the stated requirements. We have 491 units. That's exactly what the EIS considered. We have met the 15% requirement for seniors. There's nothing that I saw in the environmental impact statement that said where the seniors had to live, whether it was a townhouse or an apartment. And I believe that number is like 98, if my math is correct. We also met the requirements for the percentage of affordable housing. And within the zoning and within the environmental impact statement, there were specific size requirements for the units, so many square feet for 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and our drawing meets all of those requirements. But I would not have any problem, furthering the information exchange and developing what you're asking for to see, how that fits in. And I look forward to the opportunity to do that.
I appreciate that. Again, we can in theory meet thresholds. We can meet open space. We can meet, number of units. We can, but at some point, if you compare the test case, which was the subject of the seeker process, and let's say you came in with one big building that had all the units on it, clearly that would be fundamentally different than what was contemplated and anticipated in the GEIS. So, and obviously that's not what's occurring here, but at some point, we have to understand whether the variations in what was examined from a seeker perspective, because there was a test case that was examined from an environmental perspective, how it differs, whether it's from a traffic perspective. Those multifamily units where there are 300 of them instead of, let's say, 124 townhomes, they are all exiting onto Orange Turnpike. That traffic, that trip generation, by virtue of the fact you have multifamily dwellings instead of townhouses, it's going to be different. That might be better. It might be more traffic. It might be less traffic. But there are certain assumptions that were in the test case based on a layout that I think it was anticipated that even though there might be modifications, they wouldn't be substantial. And here we're kind of changing product locations. It affects other things, and that's why I think, again, while you might fit within the CCR regulations, what I want to understand is other aspects of whether how to what extent you vary from some of the seeker determinations, such as traffic. I'm happy to facilitate and to establish whatever offline meetings or, what is needed to be able to communicate, how we can get this information and how the planning board can then study it and evaluate it, and again, come up with a recommendation to the town board.
I look forward to that. And just before you had the opportunity to join us, I summarized some of the findings from Creighton Manning's traffic impact study that they prepared for us on June 30th of this year. And they went back to the 2019 Nelson Pope traffic study, and they built on that, and they considered the changes between what was proposed in 2019 and what we're proposing with the different layout. So, but I'm more than happy to review that and to have Creighton Manning come to any meetings with your experts as well.
Great, I appreciate that. Those are my comments at this time.
Okay, Ashley, so at this point, I think we're just taking further consideration of this project, and over the next month, we'll start to prepare our thoughts for review at a next meeting so that we can start to encapsulate our recommendations one way or the other to the town board. Anything else that we should be doing this evening?
That's it.
Gentlemen, anything we can do for you?
No, I appreciate the interest and the attention. So
Any further information that you'd like to share?
not tonight.
Okay,
But, yeah.
oh, fine. I think that Bonnie's comments regarding, does this proposal fit the test case as far as, since if this is the equivalent of what the test case was, the way that everything was created, it doesn't require you to go through the seeker process, which of course is a significant advantage. Perhaps a narrative or some commentary on how you feel that what you're proposing is materially the same as what was evaluated under the original seeker of the test case would be really beneficial for this board in making our recommendations.
Okay, I welcome that suggestion. We will do that.
Thank you. Board, if there's nothing else for you, everyone.
I do have one thing.
Thank you, Pat.
So there are a lot of people here tonight, just as there was last month regarding this project. There's a lot of interest in it, and I would just make a suggestion that people avail themselves of the agenda that's publicized, because a lot of people had to suffer through a lot of information tonight when they were really interested in what happened in the last hour. So, keep an eye on the agenda. So if the Rye Hill portion is the last thing to be talked about on the agenda, you'll know that you don't have to be here and suffer through the rest of us. Oh, don't worry about it.
It's permissible, although I have to say I'm really pleased to see the number of people out here tonight. We don't usually get this kind of audience for a planning board. I appreciate your interest in the project. And if I can loop back to where we started this evening, since so many of you have shown an interest tonight, remember, your planning board is here representing you. We have an open position. Thank you. Frankly, that's our job. We're proud to do it. We do have an open position on the planning board, and I believe a position for an alternate as well we're looking for. So if anyone, and also on our ZBA, which is similar yet different from what we do here, I would say if anyone had an interest in finding out what it's like to serve on a planning board, any questions about that kind of thing, because they might be sitting there in the audience and saying, maybe I could be helping with that. I would certainly be happy to speak with any of you who are interested. You can get my information through Noreen in the Planning and Zoning Office. And if you have any questions about the planning board, how it works, and whether serving on the board might be right for you, again, I'd be happy to discuss that with you. Thank you for your attendance tonight. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Entertaining of